I'm Grim.
I'm Zolgar. That's Kaiju.
And this is Two Idiots and a Dog, Idiots on Film,
where we explore movies that we love
or think are important for pop culture. This week, we're talking about Fifth Element.
We chose Fifth Element for our introductory episode for a couple of reasons. So, I have a friend who says Fifth Element is one of the few perfect movies. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. Mike, if you ever listen to this and you want to debate this, feel free. But after watching it again, I really do feel like it's a lot better movie than it gets credit for. It's really well built, and it is an aesthetically gorgeous sci-fi film that really does kind of capture the 90s of sci-fi.
And before we get into it, a brief word from our sponsors. We don't have any. So here's a plug instead.
Like our logo? We do too.
It was made for us by Tundra Katie Bean. You can find more of her work on her Patreon at patreon.com/Tundra Katie Bean. That's patreon.com/TundraKatieBean.
You can also find a link to that on our Patreon page and our SoundCloud page.
Yeah, Fifth Element, everything he said is more or less true. Where to start? So many great places.
Well, we could just start right at the beginning. It has that classic 80s and 90s sci-fi slow burn entry. Not as bad as some, but it's still really slow lead up, and then we get into the temple scene, and it's not until we're, about 10-15 minutes in that things really ramp up and we see that there's actually weird shit going on.
Yeah, things start going... at first it looks like the boring opening of another archaeological drama fest. And then the priest shows up and there's just something about him. And then we realize, oh, you're here to kill these guys. And we're like, okay, so that's going to be our... Oh, that's a spaceship. Okay, then.
Oh, those are aliens. And they're not bad guys. But they killed the guy. The f*** is going on here?
And that's Luke Perry with a gun. And then we see none of those characters ever again.
Because that was 300 years ago. And the alien ship explodes. And
300 years later.
On fire, in space, where there's no oxygen.
Mm-hmm. Are you done? Do you feel better?
Science!
You see what I live with? This is what I work with every day.
So after we get that, we do have the opening sequence with the modern, in terms of when this movie takes place, Earth military and the evil MacGuffin. Mm-hmm. The alien ship or the Earth ship sitting there looking at the alien device being like, so, what are we doing? Let's blow it up.
And that went great.
And of course, I love the president being, I have doubts. I think I don't, and firing the missiles.
Yeah. So
it wasn't even the president was the warmonger, and especially with the actor they had playing the president, they could have so easily gone for that hyper-violent warmonger president, but they didn't.
Yeah, he was definitely... I really loved that actor's performance in this role. He really walked that line between stately and formal and I am 110% done with everyone around me. Oh my god.
Yeah, he kind of reminded me a little bit of Sisko in Deep Space Nine, in that he knew when he had to be formal and professional, but he also really did strike me as somebody who, if he had to, would box a Klingon.
Hey, sometimes you just gotta box a Klingon.
Yes, I know, wrong universe, but I don't care.
Well, and speaking of universes, I think that's one of the things that I need to touch on here is with the sequence, we are introduced to a lot of the aesthetic design choices of the movie. Costuming, creature design for the aliens, ship design for the ships. So we've got The aliens that we've met at this point, which are big, giant, clunky, armored, we're not sure.
So I have a theory that the reason they're so clunky is that they're from a lower gravity planet, and maybe the armor they wear is the only way they can survive on Earth.
That's possible. And the thing I love about this, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here in this explanation just so that we stick with aesthetics here, because really the aesthetics of this movie are phenomenal.
Yeah, it is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen aesthetically.
The armors were all slightly different from each other. There were little subtle differences here and there if you looked. So it wasn't just one bog standard suit that they copied. They started with the same base suit and they made minor adjustments. The one scene you can really see it in is when they're marching in that 5-man block. Especially the one in the middle has completely different spine ridges on the shoulders, which was interesting to note. And then later we meet the warrior race, who have some limited shapeshifting from what we can tell. And their normal faces, their natural faces, like you first glance over them and you're like, okay, creatures. But then later as you see them appear more throughout the film, you realize, oh no, these are individual faces. And not just some dude in makeup individual faces. They sculpted the creature designs so that each, like the prosthetic pieces, were slightly different enough that you could actually just at a glance tell these guys apart once you realized there was that distinction.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the major benefits of going with practical effects over CG, especially in the 90s when CG wasn't really very good yet. And yes, they could have gone with cheap crap practical effects, because we've all seen the movies that use cheap crap practical effects.
Especially in the 90s.
Carnosaur, anyone?
I think you're the only human being on the planet that's seen that.
No, I'm not, because there were a whole bunch of people in the theater with me when I saw it.
You were hallucinating.
Hey, it was Mondo Monday. We were there to make fun of it.
There's something wrong with you people.
Something wrong with you.
Anyway.
But, so they were able to take the sculpt for that mask and then let the props and costuming department really go through and do little detail work on each of them so that they weren't just a carbon copy, every single one is the same.
Yeah. And you see this with several other elements throughout the film, where there are some things that are absolutely cookie cutter, copy paste, pasta, police squad cars, but they should be.
Yeah.
They were stock standard.
Even the police uniforms.
Yeah.
The police uniforms, yeah, it was individual people wearing them, but their uniforms were the same uniform over and over again.
Yeah. One or two of them had very slight deviations, and that's the thing, that's the attention to detail. They were worn in different places. Like, one had the word police was worn a little bit. One of them had like a scuffed pauldron. So even when we had uniforms, there's still these variations. I think the only thing I saw that was truly cookie cutter identical to each other were the starships in the Terran fleet that we see engaging with what we learned is called Mr. Shadow. We never actually get a real name for it. It's kind of comes across as like just a nickname this entity uses so that
the evil MacGuffin.
Yeah, the evil MacGuffin has a name that its minions can use because they need a name for it. And Mr. Shadow, you can just look at somebody and be like, Mr. Shadow said to do this. They immediately know what you're talking about instead of, yeah, you know that sky ball that wants to kill us all that we work for? Yeah, it told me to do this. And those ship designs, we talked about this a little bit earlier, are definitely reminiscent of pre-existing sci-fi designs from other properties, but they're not direct copies.
Yeah. There's definitely an inspiration from the Imperial Star Destroyers in those Earth Force ships but they're not just, oh, hey, we're just going to make Star Destroyers. And if I knew more, like, specific ships from specific properties, I could probably pin down other kind of inspiration as well.
The triangular attack ship design is very common in sci-fi, so I'm sure there's a couple of nods hidden in that design that I'm not picking up on.
Zorg's ship, I did kind of feel a little bit like it was inspired by the Lambda-class shuttle from Star Wars.
Especially the interior.
Well, and the exterior, because it had that kind of Y shape that flew this way.
Yeah. And, of course, Lost in Paradise, the ship there was clearly built to be a space cruise ship, drawing inspiration from actual cruise ships, which I thought was a neat touch. We've kind of sort of seen this before in other properties, but the fact that they committed to it on this level.
And, of course, at the same time, the ship that they go from Earth to Paradise is just a modified space shuttle. Mm-hmm. It very much is reminiscent of the last generation of space shuttles.
Also, when do I get the magic button I can press that just puts me to sleep?
Dude, right?
Oh, I wish. But yeah, the aesthetics of the film, we're going to be talking about the aesthetics for a little bit longer here because we do need to briefly touch on general costuming.
The costuming was bloody brilliant.
It was great. It was familiar yet also alien. And had a lot of orange.
Oh, and there was just this whole... The only other movie I can think of with a similar, like, costuming palette, not when the palette isn't quite the right word, but is Blade Runner. That weird kind of mishmash of a lot of different aesthetics going into the costumes.
And it worked here.
It worked brilliantly.
I've seen attempts at replicating this in other films that did not work.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like they gave a 5-year-old $100 to spend in a thrift store and said, put our costuming department together this way. And
sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
In this instance, it worked.
It absolutely works in this instance.
And with the aesthetics, it's also worth noting that for the most part, the special effects in this movie did age really well.
And you touched on this earlier, that's one of the benefits of practical effects, and good practical effects.
And also, not just use practical effects, but there are places where they use CG, but they didn't, like, really show us the CG up close. One of the biggest places is where we see one of the warrior alien, I do not remember their names, the head shift from the human head back to their proper face.
Yeah, that was very well done. The other major CG object we see throughout the film is the shadow entity itself, and the thing is, the 90s CG that has that like plastic oily look really worked in this instance.
It did. There's one other place where we do see some CG, and that is some of the cars, especially like that wall of police cars that Corbin runs into.
Yeah,
that was CG. I think they did have physical props for the cars, but I think that for the quantity of them, they did use a lot of CG in that sequence.
Which would make sense, and if so, it was well done, because I'm genuinely not sure if it was CG. It makes sense that it would be CG, but I genuinely couldn't tell just from watching the clip.
I also did watch it on a bigger screen, but you know.
Yeah, I also watched it on a closer screen. So, yeah. Either way, though, it was very well done. They really did a great job in picking how they did their special effects, when they did their special effects, and the editing was sublime.
Yeah, like I said, I can see why someone might call this a perfect movie.
I don't. Don't be wrong, I love this movie. You know I love this movie. But it is far from a perfect movie. Speaking of perfect, how about that Lilu?
You would go there.
So, side note, this is actually the first film I ever saw Milla Jovovich in. And what a role for me to be introduced to her as.
I don't know if it's the first one I saw her as, but I'm usually not very good with actors. There's only a few that I know just like off the top of my head.
And what I love about Lilu is she is not a side character like so many female interests would be... Okay, so technically, yes, she is the MacGuffin, but how many movies have you seen where you have an actual person is your MacGuffin, and they're still just kind of on the side throughout everything, like they're relying entirely on some protector, and that's our protagonist? No, in this movie, we have two protagonists, Corbin and Lilu.
Yeah, and Lilu is on her mission and realizes that Corbin can help her.
Her intelligence is on display pretty much from the moment we actually meet her as her, and not just a disembodied hand clutching a case.
Clutching a handle of a case.
A handle of a case, yes. She clocked the entire room she was in a few seconds, and in those few seconds formulated the plan that she needed in order to get away, and then executed it perfectly.
Yeah. Which, of course, anytime in a movie someone says, oh, it's unbreakable, it's getting broken.
Oh, absolutely. Like, should be a law of cinema if it isn't already. So, we see her intelligence. We know she's physically capable because she just broke a thing that's unbreakable. And we know that she's willing to take risks in order to complete her objective. And that whole sequence I really like because, one, it's got one of my favorite little details in the movie, which is, your ventilation is not clean. Period. Full stop. Not happening. Like, those palms were black, and that is exactly what crawling around inside there would be like, because, fun fact, ventilation is for moving air. It's not exactly meant to be opened up and cleaned periodically. That's why they install air filters. But dust particles and things can still get through and will cake the inside of your ventilation.
Yeah, the only time that ventilation is clean is when it's freshly installed, or if you have some kind of system that actively cleans it, which is not very common.
And they could have very easily just been like, oh yeah, we've got a cleaning system in this movie. No, they took the time to be like, no, our ventilation is still dusty and crummy. It's an interesting little detail, and I liked it.
But she had the time to wash her hands between when she jumped off the building and when she crashed into Corbin's car.
Oh, of course. Which brings us to one of my favorite elements of this whole thing. Ha ha, see what I did there? Elements. Ha ha ha, I'm funny.
Looks aren't everything.
Could you come here for a moment?
No, if you want to stab me, you have to get off your fat ass and come over here and do it yourself.
Fine.
Which, also, the sequence when she jumps off the building, that's another place where it shows her intelligence. That she was able to time it, knowing that she would land in a car that was close enough to her that she wouldn't kill herself.
And furthermore, was able to utilize her surroundings to quickly recognize that this individual could help her, might help her. The fact that the words... Like, I think that's something that we really need to comprehend here is her language processing is bananas, because she can read and understand something based off of just reading the word, because that's how she learns her language. She goes through a database, and yeah, that database has pictures and stuff too, but that database was mostly just the words scrolling past the screen. And that's how she learns English.
Well, perfect being.
Yeah. So Lilu's super intelligent. I love the sequence, though, because, I mean, of course our two protagonists have to meet coincidentally. Naturally. Yeah. And it also gives rise to my favorite line in the whole movie. I only speak two languages, English and bad English.
Oh, and, you're even kind of set up for it a little bit with the sequence when we kind of first meet Corbin, where he's on the phone with his boss, because he's a cab driver, and talked about wanting a perfect woman, and like, it doesn't exist. So she's basically just going to fall into his lap.
Big bada boom. It's a really cool sequence. It's got a few tropes in it that set us up, and really that's one of the things is we've got a lot of classic tropes on display in this movie. We've got, ancient evil. We've got the MacGuffin weapon, fate of the world and the balance. All the stock standards are here, but the way they're executed works.
Yeah, it is really well done. And of course, Then the whole sequence of her landing in Corbin's cab leads us to the three-dimensional chase. Those are always great, and they did this one really well because they really did acknowledge that things work in 3 dimensions, though not as much as some do.
And this was also one of our first true action sequences. We had hints of action previously where we had Luke Perry with a gun, and we had the spaceship getting destroyed, which, by the way, you've had 300 years to plan this. Won the spaceship? No escort? Really? Really? Anyway.
Maybe it getting blown up was actually part of their plan because they knew enough would survive that the humans could reconstruct Lilu and... I don't know.
I'm not even dignifying that with a response.
Hey, maybe. They might be that smart. I mean, they knew to do a double bait and switch on the stones, so...
Oh, I love all of the little bait and switches with the stones. It's hilarious. Like, every time he thinks he's got them. Nope! Which kind of brings us to a good point here. Zorg. The man himself. Our main antagonist.
Gary Oldman is a bloody chameleon.
I love him. It's one of the reasons why I need to get you to watch that movie we talked about earlier, because he's the bad guy in that too.
Never. I won't do it. You can't make me.
Well, know what's going on my list for season 2 then?
No, can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Not today. Stars.
Uh-huh.
That's another movie we need to put on our list.
Yeah. So Zorg is here, and he's our... At first, he looks like the... Well, not looks, because his character design is, as previously stated with other designs, phenomenal.
Only Gary Oldman could pull off that ridiculous hairdo and hat thing.
I know! It was great. And the fact that we never saw the limp, but his movements still sold it, along with the heavy footfall. And that accent is not an accent Gary Oldman normally breaks out. That is not the voice he normally uses when he takes on a villainous role. He was phenomenal, and Zorg himself looks like, not appearance-wise, to be clear, your bog-standard capitalist bad guy. And to an extent he sort of is, except we get it made very clear in several scenes that he is a bad guy, knows it, doesn't care.
Zorg, you're a monster.
I know. Like, just, I love me a sympathetic villain. You know this. I love me villains with these real human motivations. But I also love when a villain is willing to be a villain and actually take the time to look at the camera and go, I'm the bad guy. And that, in a way, is also Zorg's own downfall. His general apathy about his own villainous tendencies screws him in the end.
Yeah. Let's see. You wanted to touch on the whole debate of good and evil thing, right?
Yeah, like we had to have our philosophical debate. So, of course, we kidnap Cornelius and drag him over to Zorg, and they have their big epic talk, and of course, Zorg chokes on a cherry, so Cornelius has to save him, and in so doing proves his own point about how the sanctity of life and blah, 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 blah. Which leads into an interesting factoid you pointed out.
That throughout this entire movie, our kind of primary protagonist, Corbin Dallas, it's some debate as to whether Corbin or Lilu is the primary, but regardless, Corbin Dallas and Zorg never cross paths. They never meet. They
have two tenuous links. One, Zorg owned the cab company he worked for, and so when Zorg ordered 1 million jobs to be fired, he got fired. That's the only real tangible link he has to Zorg. And then there's a later sequence where they miss each other by seconds at the elevators in Lost in Paradise.
Yeah, but
they're never in the same room together, and they never meet. They never talk. They never interact.
And even further, they never... Well, no. Zorg knows that Corbin Dallas is involved and is working indirectly against him, but Corbin Dallas has absolutely no knowledge of Zorg's involvement in this whole storm at all.
And it's great. It's great. Cinematically, narratively, I find it to be a really interesting framing device. And one I would like to use, but have no projects to use it in right now. So, It's great. I love it. I love Zorg as a character, and I also love the fact that his end was brought about by his own hubris.
I wouldn't even call it his own hubris. I would call it his end is brought about by his own holery.
And my favorite part of it is his death wasn't even deliberate. He was collateral damage to a bomb planted by the people he'd previously wronged. They had no clue he was on that ship when they detonated it. Amazing.
Which, of course, once we get to once we get to about the point where Cornelius and Zorg have their encounter, that is when things really do start to ramp up. Because you start with this whole thing of, like, 4 different groups kind of all converging on the spaceport, all claiming to be Corbin Dallas, who won this contest. And there's only one real Corbin Dallas, of course.
4 Corbin Dallases, only one is the real one.
4 Corbins enter, 1 Corbin leaves.
Wrong franchise.
There's no such thing as a wrong franchise for a Beyond Thunderdome reference.
Anyway.
Then, we get to the launch sequence for the ship, where we're just, again, we're cutting between sequences so fast that done by anyone else, it would be a jumbled mess. The way it was put together was just beautiful cinematography, because everything lined up and matched up, and you're never confused through the whole thing.
Yeah. And the thing is, I kind of touched on this briefly, we have 4 different paths converging. We've got the priest working for the church or himself, or whatever you want to put it. Corbin working for the government. Zorg working for Mr. Shadow. And the warriors that he tried to blow up working against Zorg. Which is really intriguing to me is that the 4th little group there doesn't care about the first 2 groups at all. They're in this now solely to screw Zorg.
Though, sort of. Because they do still want to get the stones to negotiate with Zorg. They want to use those stones for leverage over Zorg, as opposed to just completely to screw him.
But that also still means they do not care about the first 2 groups. They do not care about the priest. They do not care about Corbin. They are just in their way.
The only reason they care about Corbin is once Corbin has the stones, which I don't think they ever actually realized that Corbin had the stones.
No, they didn't. They never realized he had them. This is what we mean. It's like a complex, chaotic ballet where all the pieces come together, and it's pure, unadulterated, grade A cluster.
Yeah, like I say, I literally have a note that says this whole movie is just a cascade of shit going wrong to collide everyone together, except Zorg and Corbin.
But the direction and editing in such a way so that the audience completely understands everything that's going on. It's great. It's great. And we seem to be making a habit out of this, where we have a movie where our first true action hero sequence is a ways into the film.
Well, that's also because we've done 2 movies in a row. They're Bruce Willis movies, with Bruce Willis playing Bruce Willis in a Bruce Willis movie.
But the twist here is that our primary action hero sequence that we see first is not Bruce Willis.
True. It's Lilu kicking the ass out of a whole bunch of enemies.
And they had it coming. And we get to see that, just this reaffirmation that, yeah, Lilu is a badass.
But she's not bulletproof.
Not bulletproof. Where we see the only protagonist in the film, because I'm sorry, Cornelius is not a protagonist, who actually meets and interacts directly with the antagonist is Lilu, not Corbin.
And, of course, she barely does, because She's like, wait a second, this gun is going to murder me. I need to get away from it.
Time to leave. And she's injured, but not out completely, but still injured. And that injury doesn't magically go away in the, stock standard action hero sort of way. Corbin picks up a few minor injuries, but nothing as serious as what she gets hit with. So it's kind of interesting to see this kind of action-y type of movie where you've got a protagonist that's not just walking off a bullet wound.
Which, that's another fairly common thing for especially early Bruce Willis movies. I don't know if it's just coincidental that this does it too, but it is kind of a...
Yeah.
Well, I think part of it is the 80s and 90s, we did see a rise in the everyman action hero. And the point of the everyman action hero was that it was supposed to seem more realistic. So, yeah, you're going to get injured. You're going to be hurt. You're going to suffer, and it's not going to just go away because you won.
And then we come to Corbin, who is not the everyman. Which is interesting. When we first meet him, we're like, okay, military background, but he's driving a crappy cab. He's a bad driver. He wrecks.
He is an amazing driver.
He wrecks okay, he's an amazing combat driver. He's not so great in the civilian sector.
I know how you flow.
Yeah. And it's great how everything goes. And we're sitting there going, okay. And then we get the scene where he's recruited, and they do and you are qualified in all the mission equipment you'll need, and they do the mile-long paper gag showing all of his qualifications, which, by the way, is probably one of my favorite uses of that trope ever.
Yeah, I love that one.
And we're sitting there going, okay, so he's heavily trained, and then no, on Floss in Paradise, he's a one-man army.
He is, and not only is he really good at taking out large groups of opponents, but he is also one amazing crack shot with a pistol.
Which brings us to one of the best sequences in the whole movie. We're setting somebody in to negotiate.
Anyone else want to negotiate?
And then the follow-up scene with Cornelius, because in that moment, for those that don't know or haven't seen the movie in a while, the priest himself is at this point being held hostage by one of the warrior aliens, gunned directly to his head. And Corbin just snapshots, domes the alien, drops him in one because he's the leader, and that means the rest will stop fighting because that's how their race works, apparently. So that bullet whizzes right past the priest's head. And in that moment, the actor did a great job of portraying the moment, the exact moment, where this priest realizes how pants-shittingly terrifying Corbin Dallas is.
This person that he's been kind of abusing throughout most of the movie could have at any point killed him with his pinky finger.
And not have worked up a sweat doing it. I mean, he pretty much solos that entire... That was like a platoon of dudes.
Yeah. Which, of course, the one thing that you're not acknowledging, though, is I think that the best part of that sequence was actually the follow-up to, where did he learn to negotiate like that? And then cutting over to the president just being, I wonder.
And just looking at the general working for him. Yeah, there's so many great little bits of dialogue and interchanges in this. And we finish that sequence. Zorg gets his comeuppance.
Which, of course, is great because Zorg plants a bomb on the ship and gets out thinking he's got the stones. Is like, wait, I don't have the stones. Again. And goes back, disarms his bomb with 5 seconds to spare.
Which is when the alien bomb activates with 5 seconds on the clock. And all we get out of him is just kind of like, oh no. And in a fit of absolute cosmic irony, the ship they steal to get off of the cruise ship that's about to explode is Zorg's.
And yeah, you might think, okay, you should really have security measures, but you know that Zorg was planning on getting back off that ship very quickly, so He probably left the engine running.
Pretty much, yeah. And so we get the down to the wire climax. We got the stones, we got the fifth element, we got to run to Earth. But of course, because our MacGuffin is a living weapon, basically, we have to have that moment where she's looking through history and finds war and looks at all the horrible things humanity has done to itself. And so she's got this moment of doubt, which means that in the final moment, everything comes down to it. We have to activate the MacGuffin. We need one thing above all else.
We need the magical skybeam powered by love.
True love.
There wasn't enough time to develop true love there. Grumble, grumble, grumble.
Pat, pat, pat. There. Is this a good movie?
Yes.
We could debate that all day. Is this a fun movie?
That is not even a question. This is one of the most fun movies to come out of Hollywood in the last several decades.
And even with as long as we've been rambling on this, there are so many elements of this movie that we have not touched on.
At least 5 of them.
Little characters here and there, little world elements that just make it work. I keep saying I don't want to get into a habit of doing this, but if you haven't, watch this movie.
And also, this is a good point to note that as Patreon exclusive content, we do have kind of our pre-recording session where we discuss our notes and deal with some of our rabbit trails so they don't ramble off too much. So, if you're feeling generous, you could always support us on Patreon and get access to some more of our thoughts, because those are unfiltered, a little bit longer, and a lot more bullshit.
So much more bullshit. Word of caution, though, as they are exclusive content, we are not editing the language. So that's your warning. We edit it in these production episodes, but we do not edit it for additional exclusive content on our Patreon.
What are you talking about? We don't edit it. It just kaiju barks every time we cuss.
I'm not dignifying that with a response. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening to Two Idiots and a Dog.
If you like what we do, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/TIAAD Media.
That's TIAAD Media, all one word. If you want to send Kaiju fan mail or reach out to the idiots for anything, you can email us at TIAADmedia@gmail.com.
Again, that is TIAADmedia@gmail.com. You can also join us on Discord. Links can be found on Patreon in our email signature and on our SoundCloud page.
We would also like to give a special thank you to all of our patrons on Patreon. If you want to hear your name included here, you can support us at the Honorary Idiot tier on Patreon.